Chapter 9. On the Move. By the time I joined him, Charlie Manson had spent more than half of his life, 17 of 32 years, in institutions. Although I knew virtually nothing of his background, he had only recently been released, March 21st, 1967, from federal prison. Over the previous 17 years, he had served time as burglar, car thief, forger, and pimp. According to Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi, Manson had begged the authorities to let him stay in prison even on the day of his release. It had become his home, he told them. He didn't think he could adjust to the outside world. His request was denied. He was released at 8:15 a.m. on March 21st, 1967, and given transportation to Los Angeles. That same day, he requested and received permission to go to San Francisco. It was there, in the Haight-Ashbury section, that spring, that the family was born. Bugliosi and Gentry, Helter Skelter, page 146. By the family, Bugliosi was referring to that steadily enlarging group of young men and women which began to gather around Charlie, starting with Lynn, Pat, Mary, Barbara, Ella, and me. Charlie was born no-name Maddox on November 12, 1934, in Cincinnati, the illegitimate son of 16-year-old Kathleen Maddox. The only possible identity available for his father is Colonel Scott of Ashland, Kentucky, the target of a bastardy suit filed by Kathleen in 1936 in Boyd County, Kentucky. The court awarded her a judgment of $25 plus $5 a month for support of Charles Mills Manson. Later court actions indicate that Kathleen had trouble collecting. Following is an excerpt from Bugliosi's findings regarding Charlie's very early life. According to his own relatives, Kathleen would leave the child with obliging neighbors for an hour, then disappear for days or weeks. Usually his grandmother or maternal aunt would have to claim him. Most of his early years were spent with one or the other in West Virginia, Kentucky, or Ohio. In 1939, Kathleen and her brother Luther robbed a Charleston, West Virginia service station, knocking out the attendant with Coke bottles. They were sentenced to 5 years in the state penitentiary for armed robbery. While his mother was in prison, Manson lived with his aunt and uncle in McMecken, West Virginia. Manson would later tell his counselor at the National Training School for Boys that his uncle and aunt had some marital difficulty until they became interested in religion and became very extreme. A very strict aunt who thought all pleasure sinful, but who gave him love. A promiscuous mother who let him do anything he wanted, just so long as he didn't bother her. The youth was caught in a tug-of-war between the two. Paroled in 1942, Kathleen reclaimed Charles, then 8. The next several years were a blur of run-down hotel rooms and newly introduced uncles, most of whom, like his mother, drank heavily. In 1947, she tried to have him put in a foster home, but, none being available, the court sent him to the Gabalt School for Boys, a caretaking institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. He was 12 years old. Helter Skelter, page 137. Along the way, Charlie landed at Father Flanagan's Boys Town after it was erroneously reported that he was a Roman Catholic. He stayed only 4 days, breaking out with another boy and finally committing his first armed robbery at the age of 13. From there on, it was in and out of one institution after another, all across the United States. Reports on him over the next 19 years painted a picture of a young man with a marked degree of rejection, instability, and psychic trauma, heightened by a sense of inferiority in connection with his mother, by his small physical stature, and by his lack of parental love. Others found him to have homosexual and assaultive tendencies, safe only under supervision, criminally sophisticated, headed for serious difficulty soon, young, small, baby-faced, and unable to control himself. An almost classic textbook case of the correctional institutional inmate. One who hides his loneliness, resentment, and hostility behind a face of superficial ingratiation. An energetic, young-appearing person whose verbalization flows quite easily, who gestures profusely and can dramatize situations to hold the listener's attention. The record showed that Charlie had married at least 2 women and had fathered at least 2 boys before I met him. They also showed a deep but temporary involvement with a number of religious sects, including Scientology, Buddhism, and many Eastern religions. He was described as knowledgeable about certain portions of the Bible and Christianity. And it was in prison that Charlie developed his musical ability: the guitar playing, the singing, and the songwriting. He took himself so seriously as a musician that he was described as jealous of the monumental fame that flowed to the Beatles in the mid-60s. It was this Charlie, the balladeer, the self-made philosopher, that I was learning to know as we wound our way toward Los Angeles in 1967. We picked up a hitchhiker, Scotty, as we approached the Los Angeles area, and he invited us to his place in Malibu on Topanga Canyon Lane. We pulled the big bus up in front of his house, which we very quickly named the Spiral Staircase House, because of its stairway. Topanga Canyon, a surprisingly steep and rugged area above Santa Monica on the coast, just off Santa Monica Bay, was fast becoming a hippie haven, at least in its southern portion. Large numbers had established the communal living in the houses on both sides of the canyon, winding down south to the ocean. Topanga Canyon Boulevard was the main thoroughfare running north and south. Topanga Canyon Lane, where Scotty took us, was a little curving road at the southern end of the canyon, leading down to a cluster of small beach houses. Scotty's house was midway along this lane, with houses on each side and across the street. We had no sooner arrived at Scotty's than a spontaneous gathering developed, with about 40 or 50 people, including us, and a big acid party was underway. It came right on the heels of our bus experience with Charlie. People were all over the house. On couches, chairs, the floors, upstairs, downstairs. Records were playing one after another. The Doors, Jefferson Airplane, Dylan, and lights of every color tinted the walls, ceilings, and floors. Someone even presented a light show on one bare wall. Again, I was in my customary position during the heavy stages of a trip, prostrated on the floor. My arms were stretched out, and I sensed I was on a cross. I have to die for all these people, I thought. They don't know it. They don't know I'm dying for them. People were everywhere, doing everything imaginable, and I was inside them. I was one with every person there. I love them, I said inside myself. I love them so much that I want to die for them, but they will not know it. It doesn't matter. I love them. As this sense slipped away and I was aware of myself on the floor, I yearned to see Charlie. I wanted him to share this experience, but I couldn't see him as I wandered from room to room. Everyone was tripping in a dozen different ways. I eventually wandered out to the bus. Charlie was there, alone. He was dressed in a long white robe. I immediately knew that he might be God himself. If not, he was close to him. He held a pan of water in his hands, resting on his lap as he sat on a pile of pillows. Susan, love, I'm going to wash your feet. No, Charlie, you can't do that, I said softly, yielding fully to the realization that this was a deep spiritual moment. I'm not worth it. Susan, you are beautiful. You are perfect. You are one with God. We're all one with Him. I must wash your feet. I must show the way. I sat on the floor of the bus, and he rolled over onto his hands and knees and washed my feet. Right in the middle of the washing, a tall, rugged, auburn-haired guy came into the bus and watched. Charlie looked into my face and said, "Now, you must wash this brother's feet." Without hesitation, I moved to my hands and knees and washed the feet of this giant of a man whom I didn't know. He merely stood, looking down at me, unsmiling, completely solemn. He looked as though he might weep. Others began to arrive in the bus, men and women, perhaps a dozen or 15. The next thing I knew, people were making love all over the bus, in every possible way and position. Bare bodies were everywhere, some pale and soft, others hairy, bony and tan. It was a full-fledged orgy of the kind I had heard about, but had never witnessed or participated in. I made love with the big auburn-haired fellow, but as I did, so I was, in a flash of light, aware that I was once again inside all those people. I was inside them, even inside the auburn-haired guy. My God, I screamed inside myself. I'm making love to myself. My consciousness and awareness of my individual self slipped away. I had no idea who I was, only that I was in total oneness with everyone in that bus. Indeed, everyone in the whole world. Who am I? The voice yelled deep inside my bowels. I don't know who I am. Then a voice said, "You're everyone. You're with everyone. You're in everyone." All sense of being slipped away as I abandoned myself to the man whose feet I had washed. LSD and marijuana were the center of our lives at Topanga Canyon Lane. I was losing my individuality, my identity, more completely as each day passed. It was an evolution that I welcomed as I sensed a oneness, a togetherness with others. But with this loss of individuality came what seemed to be an increasing contradiction, a craving for attention from others, especially Charlie. And he did not give me attention to the degree I was begging for. There was a hug here, a smile there, with no dependable pattern. But he had me hooked. Several times he took me aside during my petulant moods and repeated his earliest line with me. You are beautiful and perfect. You must accept yourself. You must love yourself. Somehow he knew of the insecurities within me. I had terrifying moments of feeling very ugly inside. He knew this. And during those frightening moments, he was there. In my manic moments, he shot needles at me over my desire for the spotlight. You just want to be the queen bee, he said. Both forces, seemingly opposites, played within me, and he watched them keenly, as he did with the peculiarities of all his girls. We were in Scotty's house in late afternoon, a few days after arriving. Charlie took the floor as usual. The thing we must understand, he said softly, pacing the floor, is that the past is over. There is no past. It is dead, severed. In fact, there is no time. Get rid of your watches. You don't need them. There is no time. The room was silent. Mary, Ella, Pat, and I, with some new girls and guys, watched every move Charlie made. He had talked a lot since we had left San Francisco, but this was on a new level of intensity. He was serious, and we knew it. Now listen to me, he said, raising his voice and slapping his palms together. Yesterday is dead. Tomorrow never gets here. He looked around the room. His eyes were on fire. Do you understand that? Yesterday is dead. Tomorrow never gets here. We live in the eternal now. He stopped walking and stood in the center of the room. All your roots are cut, he said, lowering his voice again. You are freed from your families and all their old hang-ups. You are cut loose into the now. You are free. And because we are free, we can become one. The Bible says we must die to self, and that's exactly true. We must die to self so we could be at one with all people. That is love. We all felt we understood that, and several heads nodded enthusiastically in agreement. Smiles were on several faces. Out of those lectures by Charlie came constant actions aimed at ridding us of our inhibitions. One of the most used techniques was the one he had used on me about making love to my father. Don't be afraid of that, he said. Pretend you're making love to your father and get rid of the inhibition. Another technique growing out of that was the use of orgies to break down inhibitions. If we were hung up on any aspect of sex, he would lead us into group activities aimed at shattering those hang-ups. In fact, it seemed to many of us that Charlie pushed the orgy concept too far. Quite a number had come out of the hippie lifestyle where monogamy was more prevalent in sexual relationships. Most of the men were growing beards and long hair, and several of them were quite attractive. The women were young, also growing long hair. In fact, giving up even shaving of the underarms and legs. Natural, free. Those were the bywords. Clothing trended toward blue jeans or work pants, t-shirts, and other inexpensive, earthy attire. The women were more varied. Sometimes we wore blue jeans, other times extremely short mini-skirts. Still, other times, long, old-fashioned dresses and skirts. It wasn't long before we began to share clothing communally on a first-come, first-served basis. Everything was washed together, and we each took what we wanted for the day. It was obvious to all that one of Charlie's plans was to use his attractive young women to lure men to the group. We weren't talking about family at that time, but that was the direction. Hundreds of young people were on the move throughout California, and promise of lots of sex and dope was enticing. One of the most attractive men to show up during this period was one who gave Charlie a run as a leader. He was Bobby, an outstanding guitar player with an unusual ability to motivate young people, especially women. He arrived on the Topanga Canyon scene one day with his own following of girls. He didn't tie up with Charlie permanently then, but came and went throughout the whole period, with his stays increasing in duration. Music was important to Charlie, and so was Bobby's talent. In fact, Charlie often used music as a device to break down our lingering inhibitions. "Come on," he said. "You could do anything you want to. You could sing. Shake all the past and throw yourself into it." We did become more than moderately accomplished, most of it singing behind Charlie, who was obsessed with the belief that his music could change the world. From Scotty's house, we moved into a rented house farther up into Topanga Canyon. Several people were coming and going from the group, and our numbers were increasing. But the core consisted of Charlie, Mary, Lynn, Pat, Ella, myself, and 3 or 4 others. Pat and I were quite close during this period, and I even adopted part of her name to become known as Patty Sue. She, in turn, became Katie, a name that was to stick with her. One night in the rented house, we were high on grass, and for some reason, the women and men were momentarily separated. In a stoned condition, I looked at Charlie across the room. The men were clustered around him. I counted. There were 12. In his lengthening hair and beard, his eyes staring intently from face to face, he looked like Jesus, talking to his 12 apostles. The thought simultaneously startled and thrilled me. I felt he might be Christ. Highly mobile at the time, we traveled all over Southern California and Charlie's school bus, which we had by that time painted black. We stayed in the bus or with people we'd strike up friendships with or in the woods. And we soon made our first trip out into the desert, Death Valley. Charlie seemed fascinated by it. "This is part of our return to the land," he said. "We've got to get back to the land. We must learn how to live off the land." Hardly impressed by the endless wasteland, I merely shrugged my shoulders. "It's okay to live off the land, Charlie. I said to myself. But the desert? Then, with no clear explanation, we had no explanations for the things we did in those days. We agreed we should go to Florida for the approaching winter. Charlie wanted to go, and we were with him. So we headed toward the southeast. We got as far as Texas. There, Charlie's teeth began to bother him. He was in great pain, both from receding gums and deterioration from the use of drugs and lack of proper care. "I've got to get help," he declared, grabbing his face with both hands. We went in at the first hospital sign in a little Texas town and drove to the emergency entrance. A doctor said it seemed to him the only solution was to have Charlie's teeth pulled. Charlie was like a little child. "You can't pull them," he whined. "I'm a singer, a performer, and I've got to have my teeth." He prevailed, and the doctor shrugged his shoulders, giving him some medicine for the pain. That was the end of the trip to Florida. We turned back and roamed around New Mexico for several weeks, stopping off in a little college town and attracting considerable unpopularity. We were a weird gang in an even weirder black school bus. In Arizona, we were caught in a snowstorm, forced to halt for several hours, and then to move slowly and wearily westward. Charlie, hurting from his teeth, went into a deep depression that no amount of care and concern from us girls was able to lift. The next morning, he announced to us all that he was leaving the bus to hitchhike back to Topanga Canyon. "I can't take this anymore," he said. "The rest of you stick with the bus and come on back as quickly as you can." The next day, we were still getting practically nowhere. I was fed up, too, and I talked with one of the guys. New Bruce, as distinguished from Old Bruce, an earlier family associate, into hitchhiking back to California with me. When we arrived back at the house, Charlie flew into a rage, swearing and yelling at me and coming very close to striking me for having left the others. "Don't you have any loyalty?" he screamed. "What about the others? You just left them out there alone. Maybe to die? Who the hell do you think you are? I told you to stay there." I tried to hold my ground, but I was too frightened to say what I was thinking. "Fuck you, Charlie," I roared inside. "You can go jump off the cliff. You left, didn't you? You're no better than the rest of us. So I left. What difference does it make?" Things were cool for several days between Charlie and me, but it passed after the others made it back with the bus. So life resumed in Topanga Canyon for Crazy Charlie and his girls. We were increasingly unpopular with the hippies because we lacked any sort of code at all, especially sexually. They saw Charlie as a strange little guy who was exploiting a gang of attractive, wild young girls to feather his own nest. Even in Topanga Canyon days, most of us had been busted by the police several times and were on parole. We were always in danger of being picked up for anything from vagrancy to drug possession and more. "We need new IDs," Charlie said. And before long, who should arrive, fresh from prison, but Randy, a master counterfeiter. Seeing our problem, he agreed to make new driver's licenses for everyone. When he got to me, he asked what name I wanted on it. "I don't know," I said, "but don't make it Sharon. I've worn that one out." Suddenly, Charlie said, She's Sadie Mae." "Sadie Mae?" I exclaimed. "That's right," he said persuasively. "That's the perfect name for you." "Sadie Mae what?" I pressed on. But Charlie was silent. After a moment, Randy said, "Glutz." He and Charlie roared with laughter. "That's it," Charlie said excitedly, still laughing. "Sadie Mae Glutz." "What are you guys laughing about? What is glutz?" After a pause, Randy explained. "It's a prison term, Susan. You know, Joe Glutz, like Joe Smith. We used to call the guards Glutz. So there was born Sadie Mae Glutz, a name that I could rattle off in perfect Arkansas accents when questioned by the police. 'I'm Sadie Mae Glutz from Arkansas, and I'm thrilled with your California.' Strangely, it seemed to work. Other names awarded at that time were Jaime Hobsnopper, Charlie, Katie B. Everglad, Pat, Ella Beth Cinder, Ella, and someone even reached so low as to take I'm a Fibbin. Some avoided bad puns, adopting names that were to stick in many cases: Squeaky, Gypsy, Wish, Little Patty, Sandy. One day, a group of us were picked up for vagrancy by the police outside Los Angeles. We were sitting in the courtroom when the bailiff began to read off the names. The judge, a woman, started laughing. "This is like a fairy tale," she said. The cases were dismissed. It was just after our move into a second rented house in Topanga Canyon that I discovered I was pregnant. Conception apparently occurred during a trip to Phoenix by New Bruce, Mike, and me to visit Mike's parents, who were wealthy and socially active. They put us up in the city's leading hotel, and for several days we engaged in luxurious, high society binge of fancy clothes, the latest hair fashions, the best food available, and one party after another. My lover on that trip was New Bruce. Charlie flew into another rage over how we had backslidden into the world's way when he saw us with good clothes and groomed hair. "Can't you guys get it through your heads? You've got to break, once and for all, with that plastic world. It's doomed." I was the second woman in the group to become pregnant. Mary gave birth to a boy, Pooh Bear, in Topanga Canyon, which delighted Charlie more than any single thing in that period. He was radiant over the fact that I was going to have a baby. "We want lots of babies," he said. "They're the kings in this world. Completely uninhibited and free from all the garbage of society. We can let them grow up free from the plastic world. They won't even have to go to school. They'll learn in their own freedom, even how to talk." His eyes sparkled, and his smile grew wider and wider as he watched Mary's baby.